for us, it's just a core principle that we are not budging on.
Our bosses might be very different.
Welcome to Human in the Loop, a series where we discuss what it takes to build and deploy real-world systems for the enterprise.
Welcome to Human in the Loop. I'm Clemens Viernickel.
I'm Sam Denton.
And today we're joined by Kaitlin Elliott. Kaitlin is the Executive Director for Firmwide Generative AI Solutions. She leads a team that really brings GenAI into the firm and make sure these applications are both cutting edge and also safe and reliable. We've been very lucky to work with Kaitlin and her team over the past couple of years. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Kaitlin.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So my first question is, in the wealth management space and in banking maybe more generally, it really seems that Morgan Stanley is a first mover and really early on at adopting this technology. Why would you say it's so essential for the firm to be at the forefront and be a first mover and early mover on this?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's really been part of our DNA for a long time. To be investing in technology, right? So for the last couple of years, the firm has really taken a focus on that. And so in 2022, early days of 2022, we came across this new generative AI technology, which I think was really, as you guys probably all know, when it first came out, the magic of the demo, right? And I think back then our executives saw the capabilities of it being able to write a poem. Right. And they were just blown away by that. And so, as a firm, we're always thinking about how do we invest in technology so that we can make sure that our employees have the best thing possible. But also, it's really important that our clients really have the best technology available to them in the space. And so for generative AI, I think from a leadership perspective, they really took a gamble in those early days, right? It was well before ChatGPT and much of the world knew about that technology. But they decided to lean in. And our first use case, we kind of already had it kind of ready to go because for a long time we have been dealing with the knowledge management problem. Which I think many, enterprises have, right? But we had already started to invest a lot into that problem, right? We had gone on a data journey to curate our content, to make sure that the content was up to date, but also to make sure that it was tagged appropriately, right? And we had been working in the conversational AI space for a while where we had virtual assistants that were servicing both our employees and our clients. But the gap was that it took us several years to put 10,000 FAQs together, right? And I think at the time that we first started the generative AI journey, those assistants could only answer about 10 to 20% of the questions that were asked of it, right? So, all those years, all that effort and 10,000 FAQs, and we still weren't even covering what our employees really needed from a knowledge management perspective. So when we saw the generative AI technology, we really decided to see if we could take all of our internal knowledge that we had in our wealth management space. And specifically, we focused on procedures and process documents, our research reports, right? And we first thought when we saw GPT, I think we were using GPT-3, we thought we could quite literally just give it the documents and it would get it right. And we were totally in the dark when we set up our first use case. And, after a while of experimenting, we realized that we had actually built what is now RAG, but we really didn't know what RAG was. Right. And I would say that almost immediately we were able to discover that the coverage that we had was significant. And I think that's when we really had the aha moment. Okay, this really might work. And it's when we decided we really have to go all in and invest here to make sure that the firm's going to be on the forefront of this, right?
Do you think that infrastructure and data that you guys had set up for the knowledge problem was sort of a red herring as an excuse to lean into it? Or do you think it really allowed you guys to move really quickly in the early days and make something that was actually useful in a short amount of time?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a combination, right? I think that for many corporations at the time that generative AI started to kind of become big, I think there was a lot of hesitation. I think we were well positioned just from the appetite perspective, but then also we had the problem.
Yeah.
Right. That we could solve and we could experiment with. And we were well positioned with our data that, we didn't, foresight is pretty incredible when you think about the journey we went on already.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
You already mentioned a pretty interesting point right there. When I mean, like you were really like an early adopter at the time when the models like first came out. And like on the one hand, I vividly remember myself as like, this was like really like a true magical moment of like, oh, technology can do that. That's like amazing. At the same time, it didn't take long, obviously, that like people like testing it out, saying, oh, the models are actually like pretty bad at like all of these things. And like they're hallucinating. It's the first time this term even came up in terms of like the models are actually like not good enough for use in production. So I'm actually a bit fascinated in terms of like what led to this element of like people still leaning in at the firm to say like, oh, we anyways adopting this for a pretty significant, a pretty crucial process or problem within the company, even when at the time it seemed like, oh, it's amazing, but it seemed more like a toy to many people rather than like a productivity tool. Like how did that dynamic play out?
Yeah, and great question. I would say that when we first set it up, right? I think to your point, what I always love about the generative AI space, and I think you guys can appreciate it as well, is that, the demos are fantastic, right? Everybody has like an amazing product. It's really great at demo, but when you actually try to apply it and have it consistently perform, it's just not there a lot of the times, right?
We have a whole episode on reacting to demos.
Oh, there you go. All right. Next time I come on, we could do that. But so when we first set it up, right, and we started to ask a few questions, I think we were a little surprised that it worked, right? So those first kind of like instances of, we asked it again procedure questions, so we could ask it, how do I open up a account for my client, right? And it was able to give us a response, and we were like, wow, that's pretty good, right? But then I think we recognized fairly early that my team, we didn't have the subject matter expertise, right? So the answer looked really good to me, but I wasn't a financial advisor. So I didn't actually know, is this useful for a financial advisor, right? Our first assistant was a wealth management assistant, knowledge management system. And then I wasn't an SME. So I actually didn't know, if I asked it, how do I open up this account? Did it give me all of the right steps? And if there was a step missing, was it a critical step missing? So what we actually did very early on is we created a experiment lab environment. And the first thing that we did was grab a bunch of SMEs and a bunch of end users, so financial advisors and their support staff. And we asked them to go in and to play around with this new tool. Again, using an assistant wasn't new to them because they already had one, but this kind of generative AI would be. So we had them go in, ask a bunch of questions, and then rate for us what was good about it, what was bad about it. And if something was bad about it, then we thematically started to bucket it. Okay, was it because it had an inaccurate answer? Was it because it was incomplete and missed a few steps? Was it because it completely hallucinated, right? And again, when we first did this, like now it's kind of common practice that you would ask the AI to cite its source, right? But we were building RAG again before it was even a thing. So we kind of started to learn these techniques. Well, if it's hallucinating, then how do we actually know where it got its answer from? And we started to kind of add in the source. And then we would ask the SME, was that the right source, right? Because some things would be a problem of the language model just kind of going off the rails, and other things, and a lot of things in that case, was a search problem, right? So it got very complex very quickly. But I think that, after a few iterations of working with SMEs and getting feedback from our end users, we were able to realize that there was value there. Right. So while it had shortcomings, it still was able to kind of answer the questions enough that they would get value. And then ultimately what we actually ended up doing is we actually ended up taking, I think it was about 25 questions or so. And we had the AI answer 25 questions, and we had an SME doing it at the same time. We gave them both an hour to do it. And without a doubt, the AI answers were much better. Right. And the AI was actually able to answer all questions in 25 questions in an hour, and the humans weren't. So I think doing that test really early on also kind of solidified for all of our control partners and for our leadership that, it was better than what we were getting of humans. And so we just kind of continued on the path.
Yeah. You're kind of touching on what sounds like some early days of maybe an evaluation framework or something along those lines. It sounds like it was both a place where you could understand what the user journey was like, but then also use it to prove to your leadership that this was something worth doing, right? And so I'm curious, why is evaluation important to you guys? Is it the former? Is it the latter? Is it a combination of both of them? And I guess like that seems like too easy of a question. So I'll add in also, how do you guys not get stuck in sort of this evaluation loop where you're never going to get to 100% on everything, right? So how do you sort of pick and choose your battles?
Yeah, I think that last point is really, really critical. So, for us, listen, financial institution, it's important that what we're doing is accurate, right? So we don't really have a lot of room for error. I think that's kind of like the main difference. I always kind of am envious of startups sometimes when they're like, oh, we're building all these cool things. And it's like, that's good for you because you can just put that into the world and put a disclaimer on it and say like, this works only sometimes and we need your feedback to make it better, right?
Yeah.
And we couldn't really do that. So
well, you can add disclaimers. But.
Yeah, which we did, right? So for us, we actually piloted the application for 9 months. And I think that, in today's world, taking 9 months to test and validate it would just be impossible. We'd always be behind. But at that point in time, we had the breathing room because we had our first POC built in September of 2022. ChatGPT didn't come out for another month or two, right? And as a result, we were able to take that time to really start to think about what is the framework here, right? I think, there's a lot of human intervention that's needed. Like we couldn't really rely on AI assisted evaluations. We couldn't rely on traditional machine learning evaluations, right? That we tried to do that. We tried to throw like 1,000 questions and have like run a cosine similarity. And we realized it literally told us nothing, right?
Yeah.
So there was like a balance that we had to strike of like, okay, well, we can't actually review every single input and output. So what we started to do is create a regression suite of testing, right? Where we picked like 500 questions and we used that as kind of like the base. And we leveraged that every single time we wanted to make a change to our solutions, right? So like I said, a lot of the issues we faced in the beginning was search problems. So we would try to kind of add business rules to our search and then we'd run the 500 questions against that. And then we would assess, was it good or was it bad? Or how much did it break it, right? We did a lot of prompt engineering. Especially in those early days, we kind of, as we were doing it, uncovered things like few shot examples, right? And so over time, we kept adding that stuff in. And so because of that, we were able, I think what was the most important thing for us is to create a taxonomy of testing, right? So it's not only a framework, but if we say we're hitting 80% accuracy, what does that actually mean? Because everyone can describe accuracy different. Right. And so when we got through those 9 months, we were able to take not only the framework, but the taxonomy and the different methods and the approach that we learned through the assistant. And that became the framework that when we did start to build out our governance process with our control partners, like our model risk management team and our legal risk and compliance teams, we were able to say, this is the foundational framework that every use case can use. And this was what our wealth management assistant was able to achieve. So the expectation is that if another use case does an assistant, as an example, we now have a baseline. And that definitely was worth the 9 months of setting up because it then helps all the other use cases to expedite. They don't have to think about, oh, do we create a data set? What does that data set look like? How much, data should be in there? What kind of methods do we use to test? We were able to say like, this is how you do it.
One question there is like, how do you kind of like define that decision point of like, okay, when are we actually putting this out into the world, like beyond a few testers and actually putting it in front of people? You said something like super interesting earlier when you said that. So what you actually did is like outside of like evaluation, of course, running against a core data set and having a framework, is like you actually did the test of like having an AI do it and then just saying, is it actually better? So of course, and it will obviously be faster. So the question is like, does it do catastrophic mistakes? I think it's actually a pretty nice approach to also mitigate these fears that sometimes people have of like how good does the AI actually need to be valuable? So I think I have a great anecdote from Jason, who kind of like told me from his previous work at Axon, where he said like, oh, when they first told people that they're going to put video into the cloud instead of like an on-premise or just literally local storage, people said like, oh, what's the loss rate on that data? And he said, and they did some investigation and they found out that the loss rate is 5%, and management said, oh, that's unacceptable. And then they asked the follow-up question of like, what is the loss rate of the hard drive data that we actually have today. It turned out that the loss rate was like 25% of the hard drive data. So there's like, I think, and there's along the same lines of what you just described, like actually just doing a head-to-head comparison. So I'm curious, like, kind of like, how did you come to that decision of like rolling the solution out at Morgan Stanley?
Yeah. Well, I think that's just a common thing that we as humans do. We overestimate our capabilities, right? And so, again, in those early days, that was just a way for us to really, to your point, like you're never going to get 100%, right? And I think that we were able to really come to the understanding of, wait, we're trying to get perfection and we don't expect that of humans. Right. And so that like comfortability of being able to prove that like when a human does this task, they do it at 40% and the AI does it at 80%. And the risks are all still there in the sense that like an answer or a response could be wrong. Right. But, for us, I think one of our biggest like core principles that we have at the firm is that it's really that like change management of how people work and getting them to understand that when you use AI as a co-pilot or as a tool, you have to think of it the same way you did when you first learned how to use Google for a research report, right? Like we were taught you can't believe everything that you see or read on the internet and you have to cite your sources, right?
Yeah.
Not
but
everyone
the models
listens
make it
to
harder.
that.
Yeah. They definitely make it harder.
They do make it harder, right? But I think it's kind of just like trying to kind of like push that adoption and education and training with people that like we're gonna pilot this. And like what I always say to people is like when we're piloting, if you get bad responses, that's great. Like we're trying to really create this like experimental, like innovation type of mindset where it's like, you're going to pilot this, it's going to get things wrong. And that's the best thing ever because that's the purpose of our pilot, right? We want you to tell us that. And then we can go behind the scenes and we can update the prompt or we can fix the parameters and get it to a place where 80% of the time it's consistently giving good answers. And then we'll feel comfortable about, putting that into the world. And I think it always depends on what the use case is too, right? There's obviously some use cases that, for example, if you were going direct to client, which we haven't done yet, but if you were going direct to client, you want that to be really, really consistently, always right. But when you're internal and you're doing something like a summary or an internal virtual assistant, I do think you have some more wiggle room in terms of relying on the human to understand, what was a good response or a bad response, the same way they would if they were Googling something today.
I'm definitely going to remember that one. That getting things wrong is bad for a POC. It's going to be reused for sure.
I think that's a fantastic way to think about it.
Yeah.
I have another question of like, you mentioned earlier this framework around, okay, so you have a set of questions to benchmark against. How do you think about kind of like going from obviously having that set of questions to at least benchmark on and figure out what's going wrong to actually controlling what's happening once you have it deployed? And once people are using it, how do you think about like evals like during like live inference? Like,
yeah. So I would say, again, in terms of our assistant, what we do is we take a subset, so a percentage of the everyday interactions that employees have, and we do a review of them. So we do kind of maybe making this up, maybe 100 questions a day, right? We'll just have it. We have a whole team of annotators that will have kind of the rubric criteria of how to grade things. And they'll go in and they'll just, grade. Was it a good response? Was it a bad response? Was it complete? Was it accurate? Did it get the right article? Was there a better article I could have pulled, right? And they kind of annotate all of that. So every day we're kind of looking at the trend of, in this example, the assistant to see, is it consistently staying within range or did it go widely off, right? And if we see that it deviates, then that's obviously a huge indicator to us that something is broken. And that could obviously be a whole, range of things, right? But I think one of the things that we learned very early on in terms of like human annotation is that we tried to bucket things into core issues. Right. That was so critical to us because once we do that, when we go to triage, we can see like, okay, consistently, it's always that it wasn't pulling timely articles. So something must have happened with our business rules, right? Where it's no longer filtering on date, right? And so as we think about moving into this world where you have AI doing more of that review as well, right? And doing it at the time of inference, I think those like business rules become really, really critical, right? And I think, that's why I do think it's important still that like humans almost do the first pass, because I do think that humans can like critically think about what those decision points were that caused you to
Mm.
bucket it into a certain issue,
Hmm.
and then leveraging kind of that SME type of knowledge and giving that to the AI, right, will help the
Mhm.
AI to be much more effective at solving the problem. So today we do a combination of both AI assisted and human annotation. And, I think that they're, compatible, right, with each other in terms of like how good they are. But they also, help us to scale when we're able to have AI look at, 5,000 annotations versus just 100 in a day.
Yeah. You definitely make it sound like you figured out evaluation. So we're gonna now ask you about something that you haven't figured out, which is that we have this whole world of agentic AI coming, right? You have LLMs taking actions for people, calling tools. How do you think your evaluation framework is going to sort of scale to LLMs taking actions? It's a little bit different than having human annotators coming in and saying this is good or this is bad.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the way that I've been thinking about it personally, and I know at the firm, we're being very cautious, right? We know how critical it is to start with evals, right? I think the problem in this agentic world right now is everyone has agents, right? Every product and tool and workflow is automatically an agent now. But for us, when we think of agents, we really think of autonomous agents. So everything you were just talking about, an agent that can self-select the tool that it wants to use, the action that it wants to take. So as we start to think more about that, I actually think of it more like an employee, in the sense that, if you're going to have it start to execute these different workflows and take action, then you need to also understand what that supervisory looks like, right?
Mm.
What are the decision points where maybe it asks the human for permission, right? I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the early days of this actually being implemented at a place like Morgan Stanley, because it's going to be so critical for the human to sign off,
Yeah.
right? I think you'll see a combination of potentially having other AI, you know, being the guardian, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
right?
Senior AI.
Exactly. But it does start to become very complex, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
when it is taking actions, right? Again, when I think of it more like an employee in the sense is that, we also have to have some type of registry of these
Mhm.
agents. Like, what is this agent's purpose? What does it have credentials to do? Because that's going to be just so critical for us to be able to triage and
Yeah.
bucket the issues and understand where it goes wrong, right? So that's where it's definitely going to get complex, and I don't think we have a great answer for that yet because it's still so early, but it's something we're thinking a lot about. It's the same kind of guiding principles of how do we create that core foundational framework, right? That everyone can follow, so that as this kind of grows across the firm, that we don't have all these deviations of the ways that people are kind of evaluating these agents. It's kind of one way that we do it across the firm, so that we will be able to have a really good view on what all the agents are doing, how they're doing it, and if something goes wrong, we can triage effectively and immediately.
One thing that's maybe like one of my favorite topics, like working across a lot of our engagements, is like how do you deal with change management? I mean, like you mentioned all of these things of like, oh, you're introducing these tools, and it sounds like very easy. And like what's great for us at Scale, what we see is like there's a lot of readiness, more than maybe like a few years ago among enterprises, maybe like a necessary readiness to adopt and like adopt that new technology fast. But at the same time, that always requires people actually using it, people getting used to new workflows, working with new types of coworkers almost. So how do you approach change management among Stanley that you are actually able to move fast and get people to use the tools?
Yeah, well, I think it's a kind of multifaceted approach, right? So I think in one sense, we have a lot of change management that has to happen just with our existing governance,
Mhm.
right? Many of our governance and control reviews weren't built for generative AI, right? They were built for the traditional machine learning, right? Kind of processes and procedures. And so there's been a lot of change management that we as a firm have gone through over the last several years, and a huge credit to our governance and control partners who really were able to say, okay, this is a new world. How do we kind of think differently about evolving how we review this stuff? Because to the point made earlier, you could literally just be stuck in a governance review forever and never ever make it out of it. So that's one aspect. And then there's the change management on the employee side, right? Where, as many as employees that we have raising their hands saying, we're so excited, when can I get the next tool? We also have employees that have been at the firm for 40 plus years and barely use their computer. Right. And so I think for us, it's been a combination of a lot of media engagement in the sense of putting together best practice videos, sharing resources internally that people can self-service, right, at their own time. I think what's been really cool over this last year is I think in the beginning, we were kind of putting out videos that were much more like prompt engineering 101. And now we're talking about, how do you build an agentic solution? And it's becoming much more advanced. So that's been kind of fun. And then we do a lot of hands-on, right? We at Morgan Stanley have a very collaborative culture. So we do a lot of hands-on working with our employees and just quite literally sitting at their desk and being like, when you come onto your computer every day and you go to do the task, I'll use the wealth management assistant as an example. I always say to a financial advisor, I know that you look at the market every single day because that's your job, right? And I know you probably have a particular client that calls you every single day asking you, what is Morgan Stanley's view, right? That's why you work at Morgan Stanley, so you could present the Morgan Stanley view. Instead of coming in every day and, looking up something on, Google, why don't you come in every day and type into the assistant, tell me the things that I should know today based off of what has happened in the market, and tell me Morgan Stanley's view of it.
Yeah.
And just creating that habit.
Yeah.
I've gotten so much feedback from people saying, wow, that really was impactful. Like once I created that habit, then I start to use the tool, then I start to understand what it unlocked. And now I do things with it that I didn't even know it could do. Right. So I do think that, again, it's very complex. We're an organization of 80,000 plus people across the globe. So there's also intricacies between like, what do employees have in the US versus Europe and all that stuff, just given the different, rules. But I think that we're still very much in the like education adoption phase of it. And again, and then also just starting to prove to leadership the progress that we're making, right. So that they continue to be invested as well.
Yeah.
You should have a full eval suite ready to go before you start building your app. Agree or disagree? 3, 2, 1. All right, 30 seconds.
I just think you learn so much on the job, like you see what happens once you start using it. You may have to add some things, but I also work in a different industry than you did.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand. Yeah, exactly. Like you guys we're definitely in the different sides of that coin. I think for us, I do think it's important that you have an understanding of what you wanted to do so that you can actually assess if it was good or bad, right? Because if you get too far down building a solution and then you actually test it with like, again, use the wealth management assistant, the real like questions that real users ask, and you recognize that it's useless to an actual end user, you find yourself in not a great spot.
What about when that exec asks for that poem again, though?
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, there's certain things, creative use cases I get.
Yeah.
So for large scale AI transformations, enterprises need to slow down and value accuracy over speed. 3, 2, 1.
We have a pretty good split here. I mean, like my personal perspective here is that like accuracy obviously is super important, but I hate to kind of like prioritize accuracy over everything else because it like doesn't tell you anything about like what are the stakes essentially. Yeah? So oftentimes you can have so much great impact, as you said, without actually reaching a certain level of accuracy by keeping a human in the loop in the proper way, having the right guardrails around things, however they might look like. And I feel like that is like probably actually more important right now to not get kind of like outcompeted. But of course, the accuracy needs to depend on the use case.
Absolutely. And I'll just mention, I think from where I sit, I think someone, somewhere, some company will make a mistake sooner rather than later. And I can almost guarantee you it will be because they didn't focus on accuracy. So I think again, for us, it's just a core principle that we are not budging on.
Our bosses might be very different. maybe if we replace usefulness, then I would agree with this statement.
Yeah.
The biggest barrier to enterprise AI isn't technical, it's people. 3, 2, 1.
Oh, agreement.
Nice. I think it's just about taking what we already have. Like, we already have things that are objectively really cool and really useful and really valuable. And I think if we can figure out how to frame the product and the people around what already exists, I think there's a lot of value to be had.
Yeah. I feel like change is always hard. So adopting anything new is difficult. And especially with these tools, I think we talked about a little bit, is that using these tools is a very new kind of thing. So it requires creativity. So just showing people how to get something valuable out of it is oftentimes a solution. And I include myself in it. Sometimes I see like, oh, this is a very creative way to use the models and that I've never thought about. And then I can do it every day.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to my first statement, which is it's easy to build this, it's easy to build POCs with this. It's hard to really get it to a place where it's useful, right? And I think that, again, when I think of our employees, they're really the ones that are going to unlock the coolest, newest use case for an investment bank, much more than I will be able to, right? And so I think the more they use it, the more they're used to it, the more that they like bring it into their workflows, into their everyday, the more that I'm going to be in a position with my team to be able to kind of capitalize on something really, really cool that we didn't even know we could solve with AI, right? And so that's where I think the magic starts to happen. And I do think the people are still the barrier to that at this point.
Thanks for listening to Human in the Loop. To stay in the loop for more AI-related content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.